This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of May 22nd. So, a little bit of business before I get started with the ranting. The offices will be closed next Monday for Memorial Day. There will not be any shipping anyway because none of the major carriers do that on Memorial Day. But you can shop at solidsignal.com and your order will be fulfilled as quickly as possible. And of course, you can always go to solidsignal.com or signalconnect.com, fill out a form, and we will get back to you as quickly as we possibly can. You know, I woke up this morning reading the news as I often do, and I found that there is yet another cable company that is giving up on their TV service, and instead, in this case, they are suggesting that everybody transfer over to DirecTV for internet, which is a great solution, I think. DirecTV for internet, the service formerly known as DirecTV Stream, AT&T TV, DirecTV Now, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same service, is a great choice because you get everything that you like about DirecTV. You get the option of using the DirecTV box or using your own streaming box. Is completely up to you. And it's really a fantastic option, my favorite of all of the live streaming products. Check out more at solidsignal.com, signalconnect.com, and you'll find out about that stuff. Anyway, what I really wanted to talk about is whether or not that's such a good idea. It's kind of funny when you think about it because it wasn't that long ago that these were just cable companies, when somebody like Comcast was just a cable company and internet was very secondary to their revenue model, if they offered internet at all. Now that's turned upside down and everybody cares about internet, and you're hearing nobody cares about live TV. I have to say this is not something that surprises me because we saw this with telephone service. Obviously, there was a time the telephone service was a very big deal, landline telephone service. And then slowly it got to the point where it was almost an add-on to your internet service, where it's like, okay, well, you can get internet for $75 a month, and for another $5 a month, we'll throw in a landline if it's really important to you. You probably don't care. And that's the way it sat for a while. So it didn't surprise me when the same kind of thing started to happen with live TV. The difference here is that instead of just bundling in that service, what they're talking about is completely offloading the idea of the television in favor of some sort of internet. I'm not sure if that's the greatest idea overall. I can see why they're doing it. But if you're talking about these smaller internet service providers, they're going to be adding a lot of overhead by moving everybody over to those streaming services, people who would normally just be watching live TV. And if their infrastructure isn't ready for it, well, I could see a lot of people complaining about that. And the worst part would be if you're talking about an area that only has one choice for internet service provider, and so you can't really get live TV any other way. I mean, of course you can put up an antenna, and I'm a big antenna fan, but I'm talking about all the other channels you cannot get with an antenna. So you'd have to move over to some sort of streaming service, and no matter which one you pick, there would be some sort of bottleneck. So what do? You know, there's some folks who could say, well, there has to be a law that you can't phase out this kind of thing so quickly and all that stuff. I don't necessarily think there has to be a law. I'm not what you'd call a rugged individualist when it comes to stuff, but this really isn't a political podcast. This isn't the place for that. I just think that, you know, this is something that the market has to figure out at the right pace. Because, you know, it's kind of funny. The very idea of all of this is based on the concept that, you know, that live TV is dying, live TV is a loss leader, people are moving away from live TV. You can't deny the fact that the subscriber numbers are dropping. You can't. And you also can't deny the fact that the age of the average subscriber is rising. That's not a good look in a lot of ways. But I think that it's a little too early to say the train has left the station, because you still have a lot of boomers, Gen X, even what you call elder millennials, who are tied to the idea of live television and who just wouldn't think of life without it, at least not at this point. I think it's going to be 10 to 15 years before we really see the end of live television. About a decade ago, I forecasted that it would be 7 to 10 years before landline service more or less disappeared. And I think that you can say it's more or less disappeared. I mean, I think that there's still some hangers on, but obviously, when you see new houses being built without landline wiring, you know what's really being said. I think that television still got a lot of life to it. And the idea of just traditionally delivered television, whether it's cable or satellite, is still a really good business model. The issue is whether or not certain content providers are going to drive cable TV out of business. And this is really where it comes from. I'm not saying that it's one particular provider, but there's two groups that have these people in them, these ideas within them that could potentially derail live television. And first, of course, are the traditional content providers. For example, ESPN is saying they're talking about a streaming service first, in live streaming. To me, I say good riddance, because ESPN has been dragging my bill upwards of $15-20 extra a month, and I don't watch it for years. So, but these national providers, whether it's Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, or, well, if you really think about it, those are pretty much the two that we're talking about. If they continue to be greedy, continue to ask more and more money from cable and satellite providers, yes, it's going to drive up everybody's bill and push everybody away sooner. But there's another group too, and I've talked about these folks as well, for some time, and these are these big conglomerates of local channel owners. You don't really know about them. It's not something that you really hear about so much. But for about a generation, it has been legal for one company to own pretty much as many local channels as they want. There are 4 or 5 companies that you may have heard of, some of them, Sinclair Broadcast Group, Tribune, Nexstar, that these are mega companies that own hundreds of television stations. And when it comes to negotiating with cable and satellite providers, they feel like they hold all the cards, and they demand large amounts of money in what are called retransmission fees just for you to keep that local channel on cable or satellite. And if you don't do it, obviously, well, we've seen what happens when local channels get blacked out. People get pretty upset. For a short period of time, it drives sales of broadcast antennas, over-the-air antennas, but long-term, it's where nobody wins. And I think that what we're looking at are these multiple station owners being very greedy indeed, because if they're not going to launch a national streaming service, their broadcast affiliates, like they could be an ABC or NBC, CBS affiliate, and so if they continue to charge what they charge, they're just putting themselves out of business. There is no economic model for these multiple station owners to move over to streaming. Nothing that really makes sense at this point. And so by continuing to gouge cable and satellite providers, all they're doing is hastening their own demise. Remember, when we're talking about cable and satellite providers, most of them have some sort of tie to another business model. Example, DirecTV has an internet, a live TV service. Comcast has their internet service provider status, and so do other cable companies. So they've all got a plan B. Companies like Sinclair Broadcast Group, they've got no plan B. They're trying to push you toward next gen TV, ATSC 3.0. And I'll tell you, if that happens, that's great. If everything that they say comes to pass actually comes to pass, and you get 4K HDR with on demand, and it preserves a certain amount of privacy, and it's nothing but more programming, better programming for about the same price that you're paying now, which is nothing, then that's fantastic. That would be a win for everybody. But I do not see that happening. I think that we are going to continue to see converter boxes being way too expensive for way too long. There will be a few low-priced ones, and as a matter of fact, one of them just started pre-orders for about $80 for the box. But these are going to be really low-priced options, akin to the really cheap streaming boxes you find at Walmart, where it's it's just a poor experience and not something that you want. I think if you want a converter box for ATSC 3.0, in the future, you're going to pay $150 more for the next 5 years or so, or you'll pay a premium of $150 more for a television that supports it. So that's why I don't see Sinclair Broadcast Group, Nexstar, that kind of company being saved by ATSC 3.0. That and the fact that nobody really wants to watch commercials. They'll only do it if they have to, and especially the 22 minutes of commercials that you get in a typical hour of broadcasting. I guess all I'm saying is that, these companies are hurting only themselves. When you see a cable company that is giving up on providing its own customers cable service, it's because they can't afford to do it. And why can't they afford to do it? They can't afford to do it because they're paying out so much money to these content providers. It's not the cost of maintaining the head end. I mean, I'm sure in some cases it's a little bit of that. But more and more, it's the cost of all the programming that you got to pass that cost on to the consumer. The consumer wants to pay less. You want to charge them more, and it doesn't work. So why bother is what they're saying. It's not a good look. It's not a good look, and I'm not saying there are any broadcast executives who listen to this podcast. Maybe one, and he knows who he is. But it's a very bad look, and I would say if you're a broadcast executive and you find that this trend starts to take off, that local cable companies stop offering local cable service, you got to look in the mirror at the problem, and you got to realize that you got to do something about it right away. Anyway, that's it for this week's podcast rant. Please do me the favor of liking and subscribing. Makes me look good to my boss. Leave a comment anywhere that you get this podcast, whether it's YouTube or we're on Pandora and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and pretty much any platform you can think of. I look forward to hearing from you in the comment section, and I hope you look forward to hearing from me next week on the Solid Signal Podcast.